Welcome to the DX Today podcast, your daily deep dive into the AI ecosystem. I'm Chris, and joining me as always is Laura.
Chris, today's story is one of those quiet policy shifts that ends up reshaping an entire industry, and most people are going to miss just how big it really is.
Set it up for me, because when I read the headline earlier this morning, my first reaction was, wait, hasn't China been doing this kind of thing for years already with researchers?
That's exactly the trap, and it's why this story needs careful unpacking. Bloomberg reported on Tuesday, May 26th, that Chinese government agencies have begun imposing overseas travel restrictions on AI talent at private companies, specifically including DeepSeek, Alibaba, and the startup Manus.
Right, and the operative word in that sentence, the one that matters more than people realize, is private. Beijing has long restricted state employees from traveling, but private sector tech founders is a completely different category of person.
Exactly. For decades, the playbook was nuclear scientists, university researchers on sensitive projects, state-owned enterprise executives, sometimes diplomats. Those people quietly hand over passports for years at a time, and nobody outside Beijing thinks twice about it.
But extending that machinery to the founders and senior researchers at private companies like Alibaba, that's the People's Republic essentially declaring frontier AI to be a strategic national asset on par with nuclear weapons and aerospace.
That is the headline takeaway, and I want listeners to really sit with it for a moment. China is not regulating AI like a consumer product or even like a sensitive export. It is regulating the humans who build AI as if they themselves are restricted technology.
Walk me through the specifics because I think the operational mechanics matter here quite a lot. What does this restriction actually look like for a researcher at DeepSeek who, wants to attend a conference in Singapore?
According to the reporting, the affected individuals, and this category includes startup founders, researchers, and senior executives, now must request approval from relevant government authorities before any international trip. So no spontaneous travel, no quick weekend in Hong Kong, nothing automatic anymore.
And we already knew, going back to a Reuters and Financial Times story in March of 2025, that DeepSeek had quietly required its model researchers to surrender their passports outright. So this isn't even a brand new mechanism for DeepSeek itself.
Right, but the new development is the explicit expansion to Alibaba and to the broader private sector ecosystem. DeepSeek was viewed as a special case because of how strategically important the labs were considered. Alibaba is a publicly traded company with global foreign investors.
That detail blows my mind a little. Alibaba is listed in Hong Kong and on the New York Stock Exchange, which means foreign shareholders own pieces of a company whose executives may now need Beijing's permission to leave the country.
And that has direct consequences for governance, for due diligence by international auditors, for board meetings that happen abroad, for capital raises in foreign markets, for partnership announcements at trade shows. The friction is going to show up in dozens of small but compounding ways.
Let's bring in the Manus story now, because honestly, this is where the policy stops being abstract and starts becoming a real thriller. Tell our listeners exactly what happened there, because this is wild.
Manus is a Chinese AI agent startup. It built one of those autonomous agent products you saw all over LinkedIn last year. The founders relocated the company to Singapore, partly to access global cloud capacity and partly to tap into international venture capital.
Which, by the way, is a pretty common move for Chinese AI startups right now. Singapore has become a kind of way station for founders who want optionality without fully leaving the cultural and operational orbit of mainland China entirely.
Exactly. So Manus, headquartered in Singapore on paper, was reportedly close to a $2 billion acquisition by Meta. That deal would have given Meta a strong autonomous agent stack and would have given the Manus founders a massive payday.
A $2 billion exit is the dream of every founder on planet Earth. And then Beijing intervenes in a way nobody anticipated. What did the intervention actually look like on the ground for the people involved?
Regulators opened an aggressive review of the proposed transaction. While that review was active, Chinese authorities barred two of the Manus co-founders from leaving China. They could move freely inside the country, but they were not permitted to exit the borders.
And separately, two Singapore-based Manus executives who happened to be in China at the time of the review received the same treatment. They could move within the mainland freely. But the international borders were effectively closed for them too.
That is leverage of a kind we have not really seen applied to private technology mergers and acquisitions before at this scale. The deal does not just get blocked by regulators on paper. The humans needed to actually close the deal get held in place physically.
It is essentially a hostage geometry, if I can use that phrase. The acquisition cannot proceed because the people whose signatures are required cannot board planes. And so Meta presumably eventually walks away from the entire transaction.
Meta, last we heard publicly, has indeed paused or shelved the transaction entirely. And every other U.S. technology company looking at acquiring a Chinese origin AI company now has to factor in the very real possibility that this exact scenario could happen to them too.
Let me push back a little, though, because I think there is a steel man case for what Beijing is doing here. From their perspective, the United States has spent 4 years building export controls around chips. Why is talent not symmetric?
That is the official Chinese framing, and it is not a crazy argument on its surface, honestly. The United States restricts the flow of advanced semiconductors and now restricts the flow of certain frontier AI model weights. China restricts the flow of the relevant people.
It is the human capital version of an export control regime, which has a kind of brutal internal logic to it. The whole point of export controls is to slow your strategic competitor by denying them critical inputs they need.
And in the AI race specifically, the rate-limiting input is not chips anymore. It is highly specialized researchers and engineers. Anthropic, OpenAI, Google DeepMind, all of them have been aggressively recruiting top Chinese researchers for the past 3 years straight.
So Beijing looks at that pattern, sees an active brain drain pipeline, and pulls the only lever they actually have available. They cannot force American companies to stop offering jobs, but they can make it harder for the targets of those offers to physically leave.
Exactly. And the math actually works for them in the short term. If the top 50 researchers at DeepSeek cannot leave the country, then the top 50 are not showing up at Anthropic's San Francisco office next quarter to start a new job.
But here's where I think the policy starts to crack open, because the second-order effects are going to be brutal over time. Talk to me about what this does to recruiting into Chinese AI labs from this point forward.
This is the part that I think Beijing has dramatically underweighted in their calculus. If you are a brilliant 24-year-old Chinese researcher just finishing a PhD at MIT or ETH Zurich, you now know that joining DeepSeek means surrendering your passport indefinitely.
That is a recruiting disaster for those labs. You have essentially just told the most mobile, most globally minded slice of the talent pool that taking a job back home is now a permanent commitment with no exit. People are going to choose differently.
And that creates the diaspora dynamic everyone in policy circles is going to start talking about. Chinese AI talent that is already abroad is now significantly less likely to repatriate because they have read the news and they understand that going home is now a one-way door.
It is the exact opposite of what Beijing actually wants. The policy is designed to retain the talent currently inside the country, but it accelerates the loss of the talent currently outside the country who might have otherwise eventually return.
Right. There is also a third effect that I think is dramatically underappreciated, which is what this whole regime does to open source release behavior at Chinese labs like DeepSeek and Qwen and the rest of the Alibaba model family.
Oh, that is a really great point. The whole reason DeepSeek became globally famous in early 2025 was their open weight release strategy. They published, the global research community engaged with them, and the brand exploded internationally almost overnight.
If the researchers who built those models can no longer attend NeurIPS or ICML or even smaller academic workshops abroad, the feedback loop between Chinese labs and the global research community gets choked off pretty quickly, almost mechanically.
Which then degrades the quality of the science being produced over time, because nobody, not even the brightest researcher on the planet, does their best work in total isolation from peers. AI research is fundamentally a community sport played at scale.
That is the long arc of this whole policy. In year 1, you retain the talent successfully. In year 3, you have a talent pool that is no longer integrated with the global frontier of research. In year 5, your models start to feel a step behind.
Now let me steelman the other direction for a second, because some people will say, fine, this is just symmetry. The U.S. has restricted Chinese researcher visas under the Department of Commerce affiliations list. Why is China not entitled to its own version?
Honest answer, they are entitled to a response on principle. There is no neutral global referee here adjudicating any of this. But the actual difference is that the U.S. restricts certain categories of incoming visas, mostly for specific defense-adjacent labs. Beijing restricts its own citizens from leaving.
That distinction matters morally and economically in really significant ways. Restricting who can come into your country is a sovereign immigration choice that every nation makes. Restricting your own citizens from leaving the country evokes a much older and far more uncomfortable set of historical comparisons.
Exactly. And from a pure economics perspective, the gravity of the two policies is also fundamentally different. A U.S. visa denial inconveniences a researcher who has other career options elsewhere. A Chinese exit ban determines whether a person can attend their grandparents' funeral abroad.
Let me ask you about the broader signaling effect on the AI ecosystem more generally, because I think this changes how multinationals and venture capital firms think about Chinese AI investment from this point on.
Every venture capital firm, every corporate development team that was evaluating an investment in a Chinese AI startup just had to quietly update their entire risk model overnight. The exit options are now politically conditional in a way that simply was not true before this week.
Manus is the proof point everyone is going to cite from here on out. Even if your portfolio company restructures into Singapore, even if your cap table is fully international, Beijing can still intervene through the founders' physical bodies and break the deal.
That is going to depress valuations on Chinese origin AI companies for foreign investors, possibly significantly. The risk premium just went up noticeably, and it will accelerate the bifurcation of the AI ecosystem into two largely separate technological stacks.
The two-stack world. We have been talking about this in vague theoretical terms for years now, but events like this are the things that actually concretize it in real life. Western enterprise AI on one side, Chinese AI on the other.
With increasingly fewer bridges between them in any meaningful sense. Fewer joint papers, fewer joint conferences with actual attendees, fewer cross-border acquisitions, fewer mixed research teams. The talent layer has been one of the last remaining bridges holding it all together.
And now that bridge is being narrowed deliberately by Beijing themselves. Let me close on a question I genuinely do not know the answer to here. Does any of this work? Does China actually accelerate domestically because of this restriction policy?
My honest read is that you can compel residency, but you simply cannot compel motivation. And the very best researchers in any field are motivated partly by global recognition. Cut them off from peer review and conferences, and you cut their engagement over time.
So the most likely outcome is that DeepSeek and Alibaba continue to ship competent models, perhaps even excellent models, but they will steadily lose the edge they had at the absolute frontier of innovation over a multi-year horizon going forward.
That is my central forecast on this story. The talent will stay in place, the output will continue, but the magic of the past 2 years, the surprise breakthroughs from outside the American labs, becomes a little less likely going forward over the next several quarters.
One more thing before we wrap things up here today. Listeners, if you work at a multinational that has Chinese AI partnerships or vendor relationships, you should be having internal conversations this week about counterparty travel risk and key person dependencies in your contracts.
Absolutely. Talk to your legal and compliance teams immediately. Update your contracts to account for the realistic possibility that key personnel may become unable to travel internationally. And consider how that affects your continuity plans, your audit schedules, and your product roadmaps going forward.
This is a story we will keep coming back to on this show because the policy is fresh and the second-order effects are going to roll out for years to come. Thank you, Laura, for an incredibly clear breakdown of a genuinely tangled situation.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks to everyone listening today. The full picture takes time to develop, but the direction of travel here is unmistakable, and informed people will be much better positioned to navigate what is coming over the months ahead.
That's all for today's episode of the DX Today podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Stay curious, stay informed, keep tracking these stories, and we will catch you again tomorrow with another deep dive.